Hello and welcome to the 5 Yard Rush Daily Fantasy Sports Show. I'm Mark Ferguson and I'm joined by fresh from his hospital bed, Nick Owen. How are you doing, Nick?
I'm all right, Mark. I'm COVID free, and
COVID
yeah, I'm
free.
on the recovery path. If I do cough on the stream, I do apologise, but I am well, and I'm getting there. So I
Yeah,
just
it's
can't
like,
talk for prolonged periods of time. So thank God we've got Rich on.
I know. So, yeah, we haven't done this show together for like 3 weeks. I think it's 3 weeks we missed due to various reasons.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's like starting again, which is quite weird because it's ending. This is it.
yeah,
I mean, I find it a bit odd, and Rich is probably a bit surprised. There is another week to go in fantasy football still, because I keep hearing about people who've won championships and they're done for the season and all that. So, but here we are, week 18, the first ever NFL week 18. So we've kept it in the family in terms of special guests invited along. Rich Cooling, as many of you know him as Dynasty Rich, as well as being the president of the UK chapter of the Braxton Berrios fan club. He's also one of the top 50 plus one fantasy football rankers in the world, according to Fantasy Pros. And he's also been torturing himself by playing some DFS this season. How are you doing, Rich?
I'm very good. Thank you very much for having me on.
That's right. I have had that intro written for weeks, so I just needed to get you on.
I'm
So
not quite sure. I'm not quite sure where the president of the Braxton Berrios fan club comes in. I love him for 1 week, and suddenly I'm riding the bus.
and you were right. You were right,
It's,
weren't you?
it's always nice when I am. Yeah, it doesn't
Yeah,
happen
he
very
got two
often.
two touchdowns in the first half or something, didn't he? And
Exactly
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah. So we're going to be a slightly different show tonight, partly because it's the last week of the season, but also because the FanTeam NFL contests are not live as of yet. So they're going to be live tomorrow, but we're still going to talk about season long as we normally do. We'll talk a little bit about what we've learned during the year. All three of us have been playing that. Rich has been Rich is the most successful out of the three of us, which is not really a surprise to us because you don't get to be a fantasy pros ranker without knowing a thing or two about the long term and stuff. So yeah, we'll talk about that, and then we're going to talk some pure DFS. Look at our seasons. Probe Rich about his experience as a first timer, and even though we don't have pricing for this week yet, FanTeam, we're still going to talk about players. We like the games maybe to target and all that sort of thing. So I think that's everything, Nick, isn't it? We're going to do tonight.
yeah. I think that should be enough to see us through, Mark.
Yeah.
And go out with a bang, as it were.
Okay, so let's start with season long, Nick. Do you want to talk about your season long team?
Not really, is the answer to that. But yeah, obviously throughout the season we've been covering the season long, and we have had a set team right from the get-go where we've said this is the team, we're going to follow it on a journey throughout the season. Basically make changes to that team, talk through what our changes are and why, what kind of players we were considering week on week. And we had a big focus on season long, I would say, for the first half of the season. And then we changed tact a little bit, and we focused more on the Redzone contest, which is the weekly contest, or the monsters that cropped up. But we did still talk about season long. But I think the season long, I mean, this is where I'm at the moment for anyone who's on the video stream or watching this back. This is the pod team that started off fairly well and was in the cash for quite a few weeks, but had some bad weeks through the middle of the season and didn't necessarily make the right transfers to navigate through the bye weeks. And I am currently sat, it's not my worst performing team, but I think I'm sat around 530-ish, 540-ish. My best performing team is around the 300 region. So it has a small chance to cash, but it's a very small chance, especially because of the players that are owned. I think this week, if I was to make any moves at all, the kind of moves I'd have to make would be for the very low owned players, high ceiling kind of players in the last week, and should just try and target those kind of teams that still have something to play for. So I haven't made any transfers yet. I haven't actually got any transfers in mind as to who I'm going to bring in. and who I'm going to take out, because I've not had a good sit down just yet and actually, studied over it. I feel like I'm still in a bit of a hangover from the last week because, as you said, Mark, that was championship week in a lot of fantasy leagues, and I do still play fantasy on the side as well. So over the past week, that's probably been my focus, and I've managed to win some of the leagues I was in there where they were cash leagues. So I've had quite a good week on that, but just not a good time on season long this year. But what I would say is I've really enjoyed this season long contest, and I think a lot of the same kind of planning and ethics that apply to fantasy football do apply to this season long as well. But it is a different kind of contest. You're not looking at a limited player pool, you're looking at the entire league. You can have anyone in your team at any time. So it is different, but like you said, Mark, it doesn't come as a surprise that Rich has done well in this format because he knows about fantasy football, and if you know about the scorers and who's likely to score well, target runs of games and things like that, and you can navigate through the bye weeks and you're sensible with your transfers, fellas, then I think this is the kind of game where you can be really successful in it. And I think if I was having a crack at this again next season, which I absolutely plan on doing, there's some things that I will do differently. There's some things that I think I've done this season that have worked well as well. So, yeah, in a nutshell, Mark, to summarise, this team isn't going to cash. It is my pod team. It's underperformed, but I've had a blast in year one in this season long, and I can't wait to start it again next year because it's been a lot of fun, and obviously we'll be covering that off again.
Yeah, I look at that team now and I'm starting to wonder how you're not going to be. You weren't in the cash, as it were.
It's not been this for every week of the season.
Well, obviously, but it's still pretty good. It's still.
I mean, in recent weeks, this was actually, it got to a point in the last 2 weeks where it was my worst performing team, and really over the last 2 weeks, I would say the last week specifically, I had some peak performances there, specifically from Jamar Chase, Montgomery. So there has been some bright spots in recent weeks. It's my second worst performing team now of about 5 or 6 teams that I've got in there. But yeah, a lot of lessons learned this year on the season long.
Yeah. Rich, so what position is your team in at the moment?
So I'm currently 157th.
Okay, so you've dropped down a bit as well. You were in the top 50, I think.
Yeah, at one point I was first overall, but I've sort of, I think since sort of week 12, as perhaps my focus has drifted towards more kind of traditional fantasy and dynasty playoffs and things like that, I've perhaps taken my eye off the ball. I think a big thing that cost me massively was perhaps putting a little bit too much faith in the healing powers of Elijah Mitchell. I think I had him 2 weeks on the trot. I kept him in, expecting him to play, and 2 weeks on the trot, he was a no-go. So that cost me quite a lot and certainly dropped me down a few points. But yeah, I'm sort of still scraping along in the cash at the moment.
Yeah, because I think around that week 12, I think that was the point where I high spotted as well with one of my teams, not my pod team, because I just overtook you or something, Rich, I seem to remember. And then those teams have both dropped to like 197 now or something like that as well. Had a real tough time the last few weeks. And I can't blame it on stuff like you guys can, like, because I don't play regular fantasy football, so I can't blame it on anything like that. And also, I can't blame it on injuries particularly because I've only had 2 players not play or something like that. So I just think, I don't know what happened. Either I got lucky at the beginning or I'm sort of, I regressed to the mean as we carried on, or I've been really unlucky at the end. So I'm not sure.
I think there was a period, I know exactly where it went downhill for me, was shortly after wildcarding. I was on Josh Allen for a period, and then Lamar Jackson went on a run of about 3 or 4 games around sort of week 6 to week 10 maybe, and he was performing like the kind of MVP Jackson that you come to expect to see. And as soon as I transferred him in, he dropped off a cliff 3 or 4 weeks, posted really poor scores. But then there was some weeks where I think the injuries have killed me off a little bit in this as well. And it's difficult because the deadline has always been a Thursday, not this week because we don't have a Thursday night game. But it's always been a Thursday. And though that is a level playing field for everyone, the difficulty you've got is when you come into them manage your transfers. If you don't have enough transfers in the bag, but you've got a couple of doubtfuls in your team. So there was a couple of weeks where I know Marquise Brown had a doubtful designation. Lamar Jackson as well had a few of those games. So it's sort of like weighing up whether you take the hit on certain players and think, well, there's a chance he could play, I'll leave him in, or whether you just think, well, even though this isn't the kind of transfer I want to make, or if it's someone I've only just brought in, I'd rather play the safe than sorry kind of card if there is anyone that's doubtful or potentially carrying a knock. If they're still on that injury report on Wednesday or Thursday, I think next season that's something I would look to change is if they're on that injury report and they're not logging at least limited practices at that point, then I'm jumping off those players that week.
Interesting.
I think the one I still can't make up my mind whether it was a really good move or kind of cost me later on. But I had a really good start as we suggested, and then at the week, I can't remember what week it was, but when the values changed on the players,
6 or 12 then.
Yeah,
I
I wildcarded that week, and I got all
the
players. All the players that were expected to go up in value. So it raised my potential pot of money massively. But then there was kind of a couple of weeks down the line I could have really done with my wild card when I think I had because I had the Chiefs stack, I had the Kittle Hill, Kelsey Hill, Mahomes stack, and then when they went on bye week, I think I had an injury that week as well, which absolutely killed me. So I can't decide how I feel about it because I think that wild carding before that price change was massive and really helped me kind of continue on, but also was kind of felt like a bit of a waste of a wild card as such because I didn't actually change my team that much. I just sort of pocketed the extra money and then changed it back to what it was.
Yeah. I feel it's funny you say that. I think because there was a lot of fuss made around that week 6, specifically about people trying to get as much money as possible and using their wild cards. But I've sort of thought going on, you didn't really need that extra money. I don't think you really need it. I'm finding that you're not spending it anyway. And it's kind of, Nick, you'll know this probably a little bit more than Rich, but in DFS, you have a terrible pull to spend all your money. And you sometimes go off players. You typically go players you like just to spend the money. And I think the same thing kind of happened here a little bit. I'm like you, Rich. I think, actually, no, I'm not like, I think it, because I think I was advising people to do it. I'd already used my wild card by week 2, I think, but that's a whole other thing. But I was saying people should do it. And I think in hindsight, it was a bad move. I don't think you needed the money.
No, I think I wildcarded quite early as well. And I think when it actually came to the price changes, when I looked at some of the players that were changing in price, like Cooper Kupp is one that I know for a fact increased on the first price rises.
Cordell Patterson did as well.
Yeah, Cordell Patterson did, and on the second one for that matter.
Yeah.
At that point in time, week 6, the players that increased in price, it wasn't really a surprise which kind of players did increase in price. And that was because they were performing up to that point. And I think you probably find that some of those players were already littered through your lineups anyway. There were some that wouldn't be, and one that I regret not jumping on earlier is Cordell Patterson because I just didn't see that kind of early season form continuing throughout the season, but the opportunities being there for him. And I actually missed the boat a little bit on Cordell Patterson because he had a few weeks where he absolutely went off and I didn't own him. And I think I brought him in for the price rise, but then a massive percentage of the game already had him at that point and had already got the points from him. So A, I was chasing his price rise, but B, I was chasing his points that I'd lost. So things like that, I think next year I'll probably, if there's a player where I think, the opportunity's there, and even though it's, like maybe against recency bias, that's something Jack talks about recency bias quite a lot. is you can look at a player like that and think, well, Cordarrelle Patterson hasn't really done all that much throughout his NFL career up to this point. He's not been a consistent fantasy scorer, but the opportunity was there. Mike Davis was struggling in the backfield. They've lost Julio Jones. The receivers outside of Calvin Ridley and Russell Gage, even Russell Gage earlier in the season wasn't really performing.
He was injured at that point.
Yeah, and wasn't even when playing, wasn't seeing the targets he'd seen in the previous year. Kyle Pitts was a little bit hit and miss early doors. So the opportunity was there for Cordarrelle Patterson. And it was only that recency bias where I'm thinking, well, we know what kind of player Cordarrelle Patterson is. He's not a fantasy scorer. He hasn't been a consistent fantasy scorer. For that reason, I'm not putting him in my team. Just completely ignored that and lost out on a load of points. And I think that's something, again, next season, I think with this kind of format, you've got to look at it in that present moment rather than looking at what you know historically, because it can cloud your judgment a little bit on your transfers.
I think it's difficult as well, though, because there's also plenty of examples in history of, players that have flashed in week 1 or week 2 and then gone on to do nothing. I remember, I might be going back a few years now, but there was the Kevin Ogletree game for the Cowboys where I can't remember if he scored 2 or 3 touchdowns in week 1. And I remember spending basically all of my fab budget in my home league to go and get him. And I don't think he caught more than 1 or 2 catches in a game for the rest of the season. And, that could have been the case with Cordarrelle Patterson, couldn't it? We could have had that 1 or 2 flash weeks, and then he just sits on the back burner as he had done for most of his career up to this point.
Yeah. And the thing about ownership, Nick, as well, is an important thing, because like you say, other people have Cordarrelle Patterson. You're not really gaining anything on anybody else. You're using this wild card, which is a valuable asset, but you're doing it to be in the same position as other people who've already gained from it.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose if you really want to use a game theory thing, you should be more likely to go for other players on the Falcons who will benefit from Patterson not doing so well.
Yeah. I think week to week that can work in, if you're just playing a one-off slate, but applying those same laws, and it can work in this as well, but applying those same laws to season long, sometimes
there's less times it can work.
Yeah, sometimes you get that FOMO. It's like if you're playing FPL and 80% of the game on Mo Salah, you're not just going to purposely own Sadio Mane and hope that he hits for a week, because you're going to miss out on goal after goal after goal after assist from Mo Salah, who these people are captaining also. Now, we don't have captains in this season long. However,
thankfully, I hate any sport with captains.
That would have been a bust. I mean, I'd have been lower than I currently am, because I have an absolute nightmare with captains.
Hate captains.
But I think, again, when you're playing this kind of format, there can be a player that his ownership starts creeping up, and that's exactly what happened with Cordarrelle Patterson. But by the time I was getting him in, bye weeks were just around the corner. And you're thinking, oh, well, if I bring him in now, I'll be transferring him out in a couple of weeks. So that's a transfer. I've got a bank for that. And, like you've just said, Rich, it's you still have that doubt in your mind as well, where you think, well, you've seen it happen the other way, where someone goes off 1 week and then you never hear from them again. Who was the Patriots running back that year? Was it Jonas Gray, was it? He had like 4 touchdowns.
And he didn't wake up for his alarm.
Yeah, didn't wake up for his alarm. Bill Belichick treatment, and before you know it, he's knocking on the door at the job centre, never to be seen again in the NFL. So, it's difficult sometimes, because you still got that doubt in your mind, because it's happened with other players. But that is a boat I missed this year, was Cordarrelle Patterson. But it's just hard to predict and see who that could be. We could be in this position again next year, talking about a player who's never really lit the league up, but has 2 or 3 weeks where he starts performing. Before you know it, we're talking about, are we going to transfer him in? We're going to have that same decision that we've had this season. Do you or don't you?
Yeah. If it was easy, everyone would make money, wouldn't they?
Correct. And I'm not making money, so it's clearly not easy.
So Rich, you do rankings every week anyway already for your other fantasy stuff, your dynasty stuff as well, and your fantasy pros rankings, and you do projections based on that as well. Am I right in saying?
Yeah. So I mean, it's not. I probably do it the wrong way round, in that I do the rankings, fiddle them around, and then kind of project off the back of that. Whereas I know most people will do projections that then leads to their rankings, if that makes sense.
I don't think it matters if you're right, though.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I'd love to do projections and then rank off that, but the true answer is I don't have enough time to spend fiddling with the projections to get my rankings right, if that makes sense. So
if you think about it, though, if your rankings, say your rankings are 100% right all the time, your projections don't really matter. You'd always choose the best teams.
This is very true. I wish my rankings were 50% right, to be honest, Mark. So.
Well, you're the 51st best ranker in the world right now. So, just take that. There's 7 billion people in the world. Just take that.
I'm not sure all of them quite do rankings, but
So were you using these your rankings and projections for this tournament?
Yeah, so for the season long, I think I did my kind of pre-season ranks and projections, and I know we talked a little bit before the season started and sort of looked at basically where there were discrepancies in terms of value of guys that I had ranked significantly higher than others. And
Jawan Johnson.
Yeah, exactly.
Remember, he was in your first optimal lineup, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. And there you go, Nick. That's another guy that flashed in week one, never to appear again, didn't he?
Yeah. You looked like a genius in that week when you had him. Nobody else would have picked him.
Yeah, it was fantastic for a week, but yeah,
that was three. Was it 3 catches, 2 were touchdowns, or 3 targets and 2 were touchdowns, or something?
Yeah, I think he only ran like eight pass routes as well, and managed to catch 2 touchdowns. So it was slightly.
And he was 6 million on FanTeam, something like that.
Yeah. So he pretty much paid for himself. 2 times over there, quite nicely. But yeah, it really, I think, helped me kind of build a competent lineup to begin with, and then sort of try and find value from there. I think I've struggled perhaps after that, because where I become, it sounds bad, but where I become very week to week with my rankings, it's difficult for me to kind of look at runs of games or kind of projections moving forward for the rest of the season, because I go into that sort of week to week mode as such, and I think that's perhaps where I struggled. Certainly a couple of times where I'd, simple things like I'd transfer in a player and then they were on bye week the next week and stuff like that, where certainly if I was hopefully going to play again next year, that will hopefully have a bit more focus on that.
So Nick, I thought as you and me are both DFS players, I think this is something which I did wrong this year. I wonder if you're saying, I think I did too many transfers. I think I changed my team week to week far too much.
Yeah, and I think I did too many pointless transfers as well. And it's that temptation. You see that there's a transfer there. You know that only one can carry forward to a following week, and sometimes I remember there was one week where COVID was starting to become prominent, and I think I said to you, Mark, that I had transferred in a defense just because it was like, well, I had the spur transfer, I might as well, just because.
Yeah.
Before I knew it, 2 of my players had been nursing injuries, someone's out with COVID, and I haven't got enough transfers then to actually make the necessary changes in my team. And I think some of it's patience as well. We spoke about it right at the start, Mark, as we were building our season-long teams, is what people have got to remember in like NFL and fantasy NFL for that matter is you own a player, and if it's a good player, there can be weeks where he doesn't perform as you expect. That's not a reason to jump off. I think there are certain things where you can sort of see something happening and you think, I shouldn't be owning that player because what we're accustomed to seeing maybe in previous years. A prime example, for example, this year, Julio Jones. We know what Julio Jones has been like as a fantasy asset, as an actual NFL player, unbelievable receiver in his pomp. But this season, you wouldn't touch him with a barge pole because he's just not that Julio Jones anymore. The point I'm trying to make there, Mark, is if you're building a team and you're building off those kind of names, you wouldn't hold Julio Jones for very long this season. But if you've got someone in your team, the likes of, I just pluck a name out of thin air here, CD Lamb. We saw what CD Lamb's capable of last season. We know that the Cowboys throw the ball. If CD Lamb has a down week or two, chances are there's a good week around the corner. And I think like some transfers, I've been a little bit rushed on things like that, where I've made a transfer for the sake of it because someone hasn't been performing. Don't get me wrong, it can also work to your advantage. So I jumped on Jamar Chase early on in the season. That was a really good transfer at that point. But then there's been certain players where I've jumped off them too early because there's been a week or two where they haven't performed. But what we know in the NFL is when you're if you're a number one receiver or even a highly targeted number two receiver, running back that sees a lot of workload, you might have the odd quiet week. It could be schedule based. It could just be game script. But you're still going to score well. And I think, the patience with transfers, I think, is something that I would change next year, definitely.
Do you think that's almost the DFS mindset rather than treating it as a season-long competition where you're almost trying to get the best lineup week to week with limited changes that you are able to do, rather than saying, okay, he's got a bad matchup this week, but actually he's got 3 great ones next week. So sticking with it through that potentially bad game or bad matchup or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's 100% that. I really do. I think we're kind of geared for DFS, and all our players have to do well. And we look at matchups and we look at opportunities and situations and think, well, this is the week they're going to do this and this. But as we all know, if you do this for any amount of time, we're not predicting the future correctly that often. We're really not. But like you say, over a period of 4 weeks or 6 weeks, you can pretty safely say, for example, I know Justin Jefferson's going to do pretty well over that period, and I mean, he's one of those non-droppable players anyway. So yeah, I think completely it was the DFS mindset, and that's the biggest thing I've taken away is too keen to do transfers.
I think with that DFS mindset as well, we said right at the start, Mark, didn't we, that we weren't that keen on actually stacking in this format. But actually looking back, I think stacking is a really good strategy in a season-long format. Let's say, for example, you start the season with Justin Herbert, Mike Williams or Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler. You'd have been off to an absolute flyer. And that applies for a few players as well. If you'd have started the season with... I'm just trying to think of a quarterback who came out of the blocks absolutely fine. Matt Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and maybe even Darrell Henderson early doors. You'd have been laughing there as well. And we were put off by that stack in this format because we were a bit like, we want variance throughout the team. We want to be able to pick up points from everywhere. Stacking's a really good strategy when you're playing, one slate DFS on a Sunday and you're looking to maximize your points and you stack, because obviously if one receiver, Justin Jefferson, for example, if he's going to have a good week, chances are Kirk Cousins is also going to have a good week. It makes sense to stack them together. Whereas in this format, I was hesitant, and looking back, I don't really know why I was, Mark, because there's enough transfers to go around to deal with that stack when it comes to bye weeks. I don't know why I was against that so much. I think that's a strategy that would have worked.
I think what it was is you're looking at, with a stack, if you have a bad week, you've got 2 or 3 players doing badly. What we weren't considering, though, was the following week, those 2 or 3 players could do fantastically together.
And it balances out.
And it balances out. And over a long term, that might be better than anything you could have done with your transfers, as it were. And so, that's an interesting point. I mean, I think you'd have to be pretty cautious and secure in the stacks you're choosing. Like, look, for example, a stack at the beginning of the season, we probably would all picked, if we can do a stack, was Mahomes and Hill and Kelsey. And they struggled for quite a while. And you'd have to have a lot of faith to have stuck with them. It's come good, but,
Yeah, I had the Chief stack, and I remember it felt like a weekly conversation with myself and yourself, Mark, where I was like, I'm going to stick with the Chiefs. I'm going to stick with the Chiefs. They're going to come good. And then eventually when they came good, I think I got 1 or 2 weeks out of them, and then I quickly moved on. I moved again to another stack, and I targeted Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, which, Josh Allen's had a really nice run, but I don't know if Stephon Diggs has perhaps returned what I'd hoped when I brought him in.
Yeah, so I think that's what it is, Nick. And you're right. I think maybe, especially if you've got a few teams entered and stuff, I think you just definitely, and like we always say with stacks, you got to get less stuff right for it to work. So as long as you're confident over a bit of the season, and you've got to also remember you are going to get your streaky players. Like Cordell Patterson was great the first half of the season, not so much the second half. Amon-Ross St. Brown has been fantastic for a few weeks. Chase was great at the beginning, then poor in the middle. Then so you're also going to get these streaky things. You need to be sort of available to adapt to. Sorry. Cooper Cup's just been brilliant all the way through the season. We couldn't all have seen that though before the season started. I don't think necessarily. Didn't think he was going to break the receiving record. That was for sure.
Might not still.
But I think he will.
Cooper Cup's been obscene. So a little stat I researched earlier. So there's been 16 games of the season. How many weeks do you think he's had as a wide receiver one? So top 12 receiver on the week.
Well, he's first in every main receiving category. So I would say,
I'd say 50. I think he's only missed out a couple of times.
So 14. So 14 out of 16 weeks, he's been a top 12 receiver, and seven of those 16 weeks, he's been a top 5 receiver on the week.
Wow, it's ridiculous.
It's absolutely insane.
Absolutely crazy. So, Rich, I don't think we really asked you. Is there anything you would change from what you've done this year? If you do it again,
probably give it a bit more focus. Try and spend a bit more time actually thinking about my transfers. I think perhaps some of my biggest regrets have been, as Nick said earlier, taking risks on some potentially question mark guys going into Thursday. I said it. I spent, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks on the bounce, trusting that Elijah Mitchell was going to come back, and I thought he's such good value. Not many people owned him. I'll stick him in, and I think it was 2 or 3 weeks where he didn't play and ended up costing me a roster spot. So I think perhaps being a bit more risk averse when it comes to those injuries, and I do think perhaps using the wild card a little bit more sensibly, because I do feel like I, as much as I've got that extra money, I think, as you said earlier, I think I've got 2.5 million sat untouched at the moment, and I've pretty much done that every week where I've not used my money. So I think it seemed like a great idea at the time, and I think actually it was probably just a bit of a waste of a wild card.
Agreed. Well, Nick, next year you've got to pick Marvin Jones according to Jack. So can't do any worse than this year. So,
Rich, you will back me up on this, Rich. Marvin Jones, this Marvin Jones joke has stuck with me every week since I mentioned it. Probably around week 5 or 6 mark, is it? But there was.
I remember you as always liking Marvin Jones. That's how I
There was a week where we were playing it was either a Monster or a Redzone contest on a Sunday, and we did a Spaces on Twitter. And I made the comment that there could be a case made for Marvin Jones that week. Marvin Jones, correct me if I'm wrong, Rich, but Marvin Jones has always had, up until this season, he's always had a week where he goes off big. And it's at least once or twice a year. There is history behind it. But sadly, Marvin Jones hasn't gone off big any week this season. So
he's had one top 12 week this year. So there you go. He's not been horrific.
Won't have been the week that I picked him either.
So Nick, this is week 18 last week for you to tell us all about your favourite hobby.
Oh well, yeah. It's the final time this season, and there has been some calls for live demonstrations on the pod. But I'm sorry to say,
a Dynasty Boys sort of thing.
I'm sorry to say, you're not getting a live demonstration. Instead, you can get a lovely picture of
Nick. I'm doing it right now, but you've not got us on the screen, so
yeah. No one wants to see that, Mark. That's exactly why I've taken you off the screen at this point. But no, what I want to just say is thank you to Manscaped, first of all, because they have supported all our pods this season, all the DFS pods included within that. The best in men's below the waist grooming. I think I've got a bit of a tear in my eye here, Mark. I'm gutted that this is the last time I'll be saying
Sounds like
this.
you nicked yourself.
Yeah, for quite some time. Yeah. Well, if I did nick myself, it wasn't using the Lawnmower 4.0, I
Nope.
can tell you that. But Manscaped offers precision engineered tools for those all-important family jewels of yours. Manscaped have recently launched their 4th generation trimmer, the Lawnmower 4.0. You will see it on your screen right now. Fantastic tool. We've spoke about it every week this season. Every guest that has come on has been nodding away as we've been talking about it, so they all clearly approve of the Lawnmower 4.0 as well. So what we would urge you to do is join over 2 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped. We do have an exclusive offer for you: 20% off and free worldwide shipping if you use the code 5yard at the checkout. So get yourself over to manscaped.com. Code 5yard at the checkout, and that will get you 20% off and free worldwide shipping. Do not miss out on the offer. Very sad that is the last time I will be saying that. I actually started off with a script at the start of the season, and I feel like I don't even need that script anymore. So there we go.
Oh, it is an emotional moment. You've done us proud,
It
Nick.
is,
You've done
it
us
is.
proud. So let's talk about some DFS now. So quickly, before we talk about week 18, as we've got Rich on a show, and this is the main reason you're here, Rich, as well as all your other knowledge and stuff, we want to talk to you a bit about your experience this year, because this has been your first year playing DFS. You started playing on FanTeam, and I know you did pretty well towards the beginning of it. I seem to remember seeing some screenshots or something, and you know, you were going to quit your job, and like everybody does when they start DFS and they do well, they're going to quit their job. This is their new job, do an hour a week, earn the same amount of money. How did it go for you? What have you taken from it?
Perhaps not to believe the hype. I think it was after week 2 or week 3. I was like 7 or 8 times up on what I'd started with. I was absolutely
easy money.
I said to you, I was like, this is really straightforward. All I'm doing is I'm plugging in my rankings versus the price, and I'm like, these are obvious value plays, and picking them, and it was really straightforward. And then I don't think I cashed for about 4 weeks on the trot after that. So yeah,
I feel like you've been hustled by DFS a bit there, Rich. Like as you were saying 100%. that, I'm a big Fresh Prince of Bel-Air fan when I was younger, and it took me back to one of the episodes where Will gets hustled in the pool hall, and the guy's like, "All you've got to do is put the balls in the holes," and he's like, "Oh, do you know this? How difficult can it be?" And that is literally your story there. You've had one good week, and you're thinking happy days, and before you know it, you're in your overdraft, and there we go.
Yeah, I needed Uncle Phil to break out Lucille to come and save me.
Lucille, that's the one.
But yeah,
it's so sad that you actually even understood the episode, that he could reference it. It's so sad.
It's a childhood full of watching Fresh Prince.
I was an adult. Just anyway, moving on.
But yeah, I've sort of bounced back a little bit. I think I had a very, should we say, narrowed view of kind of how to approach DFS at the beginning. I certainly wasn't looking at projected ownership percentages and wasn't really even considering who would be good to play. I basically took my projections, divided them by the price, and came up with a price per million, and it basically gave me the guys that I plugged in. As I said, it worked well for 2 or 3 weeks, and then didn't for about 7 or 8. So I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm very much hooked and looking forward to next year, when I'll probably have forgotten everything that I've learned this year and start again. But yeah, it's been really good fun.
You said you say that the way you talked about that sounded like you were sort of putting yourself down, but I'll tell you, the professional DFS players, people who do this for a living, that's all they do. They do what you're talking about there. They have projections, rankings, whatever they use as a metric, and they work it from that. And you're doing no different. And clearly, by your Fantasy Pros ranking, you do this pretty well. So, like, in actual fact, the fact that you lose has got nothing to do with the quality of your rankings. That is just the nature of your inability to predict the future, which nobody can really blame you for. And it's the nature of DFS. Top professional DFS players only win 10% of the time, which means they lose 90% of the time.
Which I think for me is the biggest thing to get my head around, because in my fantasy dynasty brain, I'm thinking sort of 70-80% win rates is where I'm wanting to aim. And as I said, if I'm not winning on a week to week basis, I'm sort of kicking myself and pretty down. But yeah, it's been really good fun.
It's like that. There's that phrase which I used whenever I talk about it. It's about baseball. I kind of paraphrase it, get it slightly wrong. As if you fail a bat 7 times out of 10, you're in the Hall of Fame. Something like that. And it's the same with DFS and stuff. You just have to, when you win, you just have to do really well. So, Rich, all I'm saying is, don't say that in a disparaging way. The way you worked is absolutely fine, absolutely fine. And you may well find that next season, if you do exactly the same way, you might win. Top prize it twice, say, for something like that, and you never win the rest of the time. It's just the nature of DFS, isn't it, Nick? It's so up and down.
It is, and I think with DFS, because you're picking, it's different from normal fantasy in that you're picking a team that you don't really want. Like when you're playing fantasy, you've got a pool of players that is your team. You're picking the best team that week that you think is going to get you over the line. All you're looking to do is win. Whereas in this, like you said, Rich, you've got the battle of, well, yeah, here's my projections, here's the players I like, but then who's going to be highly owned? So who's the rest of the field likely going to be picking up? Who are the casuals going to be targeting? What kind of players can I target to give me a bit of an edge? You don't want to just be building a lineup that's going to sit you mid-table and think, oh, it'll take over with the scoring, because that's completely missing the point of playing DFS. You're either picking a team that could finish top of the table if everything goes your way, or you could finish at the bottom. But you know what? If you finish at the bottom, like you said, Mark, you can't be disheartened by it that you've lost, because that team could have gone off. If you finish bottom, you've probably built quite a unique team there that things just might not have gone your way that week, but your process was still right. You've still picked the players based on certain situations or scenarios. So it is difficult, DFS.
Yeah, we always use the example.
That's why we're not all millionaires.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we're doing this. Is that we always use the example on here. It's like when everybody is on Dalvin Cook, you pick Jefferson or Thielen or whatever, because everybody's on Dalvin Cook. If Dalvin Cook fails, then Jefferson or Thielen will do well, and therefore you catch up on the field twice.
Yeah,
and that's the added element on top of rankings and stuff of DFS.
Even just rolling a dice one week and picking, building this works a lot with like the showdown slates and the single game, but actually building a lineup and having a storyline in mind. So we know that Dalvin Cook has had health issues in the past, hamstring issues. You slot Mattison into your lineup one week, and it only takes an injury or a knock to Dalvin Cook, and all of a sudden you've got a super cheap running back that's let you absolutely pad out the rest of your lineup. But he comes in and he performs. Let's say Mattison comes in, scores 2 touchdowns for you. You're absolutely laughing, and you're ahead of the field because he'll be so low owned at that point. Because most people have jumped on Cook. It's that sort of like building a lineup that's gonna again have that really high ceiling, or it could just fall flat on its face. And it's that storyline behind it as well.
Yeah, and that's where I played the Jets-Bucks single game slate on Sunday and did really well because I captained Braxton Berrios. I had Tom Brady. I had Cyril Grayson because I thought, look,
wow,
Mike Evans isn't 100%. Antonio Brown. Let's chuck in Grayson and.
You actually predicted Antonio Brown walking off the pitch. Unbelievable.
I'm not sitting here claiming that I predicted that, but
Rich built his lineup. Took his top off, gave the peace sign, and walked away from his laptop.
Yeah, that was his storyline, Nick. That was his storyline. He was predicting this all to happen. I hadn't even heard of Cyril Grace until he caught a touchdown or whatever he did.
Crazy fast. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's a great example of a lineup which. I mean, 9 times out of 10, that lineup may well fail because Antonio Brown doesn't always walk off the pitch. And, it's like, so that's a great DFS example. And, it's not a bad lineup because it failed because it has the potential to do really well.
The thing is, there'll have been a high percentage people who built their lineups and just thought the Bucks are coming into town and are going to wipe the floor with the Jets. And for the majority of the game, that wasn't the case. So a prime example of, building a lineup around a storyline, going against the grain a little bit, but it worked to your advantage, Rich, obviously.
I imagine most people probably captained Antonio Brown going into that game. He was expected to ball out, wasn't he?
Mm.
Yeah, and that's another great way.
He bailed out. Is actually what happened.
Yeah, it's another great example. Again, another thing you can add on top of projections and rankings is that idea that everybody's on Antonio Brown. So just what happens if he doesn't do well? And that gives you a double advantage over the field. Anyway, I think this brings us on nicely to this week. As I said already, we can't build a lineup because the contests aren't live. But what we can do is, I think what would be really useful, because earlier today, Rich tweeted out a little cheat sheet about who was going to play, who has what to play for effectively, because there's lots of teams that don't have anything to play for this week because they've either already got into the playoffs or their seeds are locked. There's also a set of teams who have got nothing to play for because they're out of the playoffs. And that's quite interesting to me as a set of teams to maybe take advantage of. And then there's a bunch of teams which have a load to play for. So how do you see this week going, Rich?
So I think if we just, I guess, walk through the chart as such and teams I'm targeting and not as. So Green Bay and the Philadelphia Eagles have both essentially got nothing to play for. They're both pretty much locked up. The Eagles can move between, I think it's the 6 or 7 seed, but I can't expect them performing or turning anything out. Cincinnati, in theory, have got something to play for, but I know Joe Burrow has come out and said he's not playing. Joe Mixon's on COVID, so I'm avoiding them at all costs. Dallas could, in theory, have something to play for in terms of they could move up to the 2nd seed, but they're pretty much locked in. So I'm a little bit concerned that they could end up resting. The Bucks, the Patriots, and the Bills, if they all win, they pretty much stay where they are. So I'm a little bit concerned with those. That I expect all the players to start in those games, but I think that if they get up early, if, for example, if the Patriots, they're playing the Dolphins, if they get up early at half time, I wouldn't be shocked to see some of their starters not playing the second half. The Titans is one that I'm really struggling with, but I think we'll be clear on Sunday. So basically, if the Chiefs win, the Titans have still got something to play for. And I think for them, getting that number 1 seed would be huge. But if the Chiefs do lose, I appreciate it's to the Broncos, so it's probably not going to happen. Then the Titans are locked in as the number 1 seed and would basically have nothing to play for. And then that green column, as you're showing there, those are all the teams that I'm targeting that have got seeding or whatever potential playoff spots left to play for, and those are all essentially the teams that I'm trying to build lineups from.
So, have you got any interest in any of these out of the playoff teams? Because I always feel every year there's a big score or one of the games goes off a bit from teams who've got because they're relaxed and the defenses aren't really hitting that hard and stuff. And I think I've seen some stuff to do with, we've got to talk about player incentives. There's lots of player incentives. I know Jack posted out a tweet about this as well, Jack Humphrey. And one of the things that kind of struck me there, for example, was that Terry McLaurin is only 40 yards away from 1,000 yards or something like that. Those sorts of situations. So you're interested in anybody there?
I think David Montgomery's an obvious one. I do wonder if perhaps we've seen the end of Zimmer in Minnesota, and I do wonder if that defense now it's out the playoffs, whether that could be sort of a switch off game, shall we say, for that defense. And I do wonder if perhaps Matt Nagy's playing, coaching for his job, and it could be a huge David Montgomery week. I've certainly got him ranked very, very highly this week. Is it another Amon-Ra St. Brown week? Obviously, we've said that the Packers have got nothing to play for. I appreciate it's a division rival and they probably don't want to lose, but if they're resting Rodgers and perhaps Adams and a few others on that offensive line, could we also see them? Jair Alexander's obviously not back. Could we see him leave, rest maybe, one or two in that secondary, and suddenly Amon-Ra St. Brown's walking his way into another monster week?
Where is that game?
So that's in Detroit, I believe.
So that makes me more interested in him.
Yeah. I guess another one, maybe Seattle. Could it be, a division rival? They could really screw over the Cardinals somewhat. I think for me, I like targeting. This is from a fantasy perspective in these later end of season weeks, division games, because I think there's always a lot more to play for. And I do wonder if Seattle could kind of get one over for next year on the Cardinals, and I do wonder if someone like DK Metcalf or perhaps even Tyler Lockett could have a huge week.
Interesting. Nick, what about you? What's your strategy going to this week?
Yeah, I think this is a really handy chart, by the way, Rich. And for anyone who's playing DFS this week, go over to Dynasty Island on Twitter and check this out. Obviously, anyone following the live stream will have seen it, but I think I'm really interested in anyone from that very motivated column. Basically, is the kind of teams that I have my eye on. Now, obviously, we don't know what the FanTeam slate is looking like, and we don't know pricing and things like that. I'm assuming, Mark, that it's not going to be a monster on Sunday, and it's going to be split. So in the last few weeks, we've had a 6 o'clock Redzone contest, and then we've had the fumble, which has been the late contest, the 9 o'clock onwards games. I assume it will probably be the same again this week, with it being the final week, and there's quite a lot of 6 o'clock games. But yeah, anyone from the very motivated column, the teams that have absolutely nothing to play for, the likes of Green Bay, Cincinnati, I think have already, Joe Burrow's not going to be playing, is he? So I don't really have any interest there.
Are you not interested in, say, like the third or fourth receiver on those teams and stuff at all?
I don't know. Maybe potentially, with Mixon out, is there interest there then in the likes of someone like P. Ryan, for example?
I assume his contract's up at the end of the year, P. Ryan, so he'll be playing for next year.
Yeah, you're almost like putting yourself in the shop window, aren't you, with some of the with some of the teams? But I think it's difficult at this point in the season, because when teams don't have a lot to play for, I think you just end up seeing a bit like a stat box of just names everywhere, and it's almost just like, for the teams that don't really have anything to play for, it's like anyone gets on the field. It's difficult sometimes, I think, at this stage in the season to predict who's going to get certain snap percentages over other players, especially in the receivers. But yeah, anyone from the very motivated column is who I've got my eye on, is the short answer to your question, Mark. But it's difficult at this stage, because I feel like trying to put a lineup together now, there's still a lot of COVID flying around between now and Sunday, and that is making it difficult to sort of pinpoint certain players. Obviously, we don't know the pricing for FanTeam, as the contest isn't there just yet, but I would be looking at the teams that are going to be really, really motivated, and it might be a bit of bias here, but looking at that Rams and 49ers game, the 49ers are still, I think, they've got the risk of not making the wildcard spots. The Saints, I think, still can in the NFC, and the Niners can drop out. The Rams lose to the Niners all the time, so that kind of game, there's so much motivation on both sides of the ball, and obviously the Rams are going for the NFC West. It's those kind of games that I'll probably be targeting.
Cooper Kupp has got to get 133 yards, is it? Something like that for the season record. So I feel he's going to be a lock. You just talk about that Rams 49ers game. I feel he's going to be highly owned, like 80% owned or something like that.
Yeah, do you know what? I think probably be a prime example of someone that I would include, but that wouldn't put me off including, say, an Odell Beckham Jr., who in recent weeks has had as many touchdowns as Cooper Kupp's had. Obviously, he doesn't get the yardage and he doesn't get the receptions that Kupp gets because he's just a PPR monster. But it's I wouldn't be put off targeting those kind of players as well. I think Kupp is almost like an auto include, and that's one of the late games, so he would be in the fumble lineup.
Yeah.
But yeah, that even though he's come out himself and said that it doesn't really count because he's playing that extra game that Megatron didn't, I think he'll still be looking to go for that record. You know, it's a tough matchup still, and the Rams haven't really done well in recent years against the Niners.
Sorry, Rich, I interrupted you with that question. No, you were going to say something.
So, first of all, I just want to say Samaje Perine is under contract for next year still with the Bengals.
Oh, is he?
So,
okay, so he's not in the shop window then.
No.
If anybody would know, Rich, I knew it would be you. I wouldn't even go near talking about contracts because I know so little about them if you weren't here. So, thank you for that. Keep us on the straight and narrow.
The one guy that I'm really, really obsessed with this week, and I think he's probably going to end up being in a lot of my lineups, is Chase Claypool. Obviously, we saw him kind of blow up last year, halfway through the season down that stretch, and have those couple of absolutely monster games. He's basically not really done anything this year, but I was completely all in on Deontay Johnson going up against a fairly horrific Baltimore secondary in a game that's, you know, two very big rivals. They've both potentially got an outside shot of sneaking into the playoffs if the Colts lose to the Jags. And that sort of, then Deontay Johnson got COVID, and it's sort of leaning me towards Chase Claypool. And I'm sort of telling myself, look, Chase Claypool's done nothing, but Big Ben's not got an arm at all. Deontay Johnson's sort of been that safety blanket all year. I wonder if the Steelers' game plan is going to be, right, let's just go back to, it's going to be screen passes to Chase Claypool, and we could see a monster yards after the catch kind of game with a couple of touchdowns from him.
That makes me think about Najee Harris as well, because he hasn't slowed down as we thought he was going to do. Whoever he thought he was going to slow down, he hasn't at all. And I'm now thinking maybe you stack a few in that game and stuff. And like you said, Marquise Brown, I think, is on it as another one looking for he's close to an incentive as well. I feel like it'd be a pretty handy stack.
Yeah. The only thing I'd say about Najee Harris is Baltimore are very good in terms of adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. They're top 5, I think, off the top of my head. So it's quite a good matchup for the running backs. So basically, you're relying on Najee Harris in the receiving game if you're thinking he's going to have a good week.
Which he may well be the case with Deontay Johnson out. May well be. I'm just wondering whether a Ray McLeod might be a really good cheap option for a DFS team as well as stuff. I just like his name, but like he's one of those players who occasionally turns up and stuff. Anyway, on that list of very motivated, obviously the Chargers, I think, and Herbert has been doing very well recently. Nick, he's got to be somebody you're interested in.
Yeah, every week, really. You know, he's in my season long. We saw. So, yeah, obviously there's mass interest there. I mean, Eckler's been on and off the injury report in recent weeks, but he played last week from recollection, and he had a decent enough game. So, again, I'd be looking to include him. He falls into the fumble though again, doesn't he? So
yeah. I think the best games are going to be in the fumble.
Yeah, I think they are, because I'm like, I've really been looking at the 6:00 games, and you know, just looking through the list of players throughout each position, is only really wide receiver that has got any sort of fitness to it. Everywhere else, you've either got questionable tags next to players' names, or you've got COVID next to players' names. But yeah, obviously the Chargers would be of peak interest because they've been lighting it up, and obviously the win there is still a necessity, isn't it, for them? So
yeah. So I'm right in thinking the NFL generally changes the schedule for this week to have all the best games in the late window. or don't they?
I think they try to match up as many games as they can so that there's no kind of too many people sitting. So I think they're trying to match up divisional games and that kind of thing so that it flows a little bit better.
I think as well, Matt, just going back to the Chargers, I think the Chargers players are likely going to be the highly owned. You've got the Raiders just there on that list as well underneath them. Hunter Renfro's been really good in recent weeks, and they're playing each other. Winner of that game is potentially then in the hunt as well. Whoever wins that game's going into the playoffs, aren't they, basically? So it's
and you punish the Raiders. You punish the Chargers in the short stuff, sort of short, medium stuff as well. You don't get beyond them. So, Hunter Renfro seems like a pretty good option there. I imagine Kyler Murray will be a pretty popular option as well for the Cards. They got something to play for. The running back situation, Rich, in the Cardinals, it's a bit of a mess at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, so we were talking before I came on. I've got James Conner and Chase Edmonds in my season long because I think he's 0% owned, and I was looking forward to James Conner being out this week. But then James Conner's produced a limited practice today, and Chase Edmonds hasn't practiced. So now I'm a little bit more concerned. I did have Chase Edmonds as a top 5 back this week, but he's probably going to drop down if Conner is playing.
And I think also, I think Christian Kirk might be an interesting player in that game to target. Again, he's close to another milestone with his receiving yards and stuff. So I do like him. Jonathan Taylor of the Colts seems an obvious. If you're looking at these sorts of teams and stuff, I mean, there's not great analysis there, is there? Play JT.
Well, leader. I think you can probably you can make a case to play JT every week, can't you? But again, exactly. I think you play him, and I think he's going to be so highly owned this week, isn't he?
He's in the early slate as well against the Jags.
The only concern there is that if the Jags, the Colts were close to going in the yellow box. So if the Colts beat the Jags, then they're pretty much in. So they could be one that, if they get up early, if they're smashing the Jags as we kind of expect it, could JT be put on the bench at halftime?
Yeah, I think, because the Jags are a bit of a mess at the moment. And I think, I'm trying to think of any other pieces from the Colts you'd be interested in. Pittman
potentially, but he's not.
But he's always been a bit disappointing, hasn't he? He's been a bit disappointing.
He had a decent couple of weeks stretch, didn't he? And that was about it.
And he's one of those talked for the season quite a lot. I think we talked about him. I think we had him in. Certainly, I think I had him in my first week 1 team for season long.
Yeah. T.Y. Hilton's been creeping onto the stat sheet in the last couple of weeks, hasn't he? He's not getting a massive amount of volume, but he's had a couple of touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. So again, if they do get a bit of a slender lead, that could be, if they do decide that they're going to sit Pittman and save him for the playoffs, for example, because he is the number 1 wide receiver there. Does T.Y. Hilton see an increase in volume there? Do they look to just go up as early as possible and try and throw on the Jags? Maybe, I don't know.
I think I've got two other guys I'd mention, perhaps not in that game, but I know Rob Gronkowski. You're talking about incentives. He's got a massive load of incentives that he could potentially reach. So I do wonder if Brady tries to get him to that point as such. But there's also Devin Singletary, and as a Jets fan, I can say that the Jets are absolutely horrific against the run, particularly running backs out the backfield on routes. And I do wonder if he's the kind of guy that wouldn't get rested if the Bills go up. At some point you still need guys to play, don't you? And you'd expect Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs and people like that to get rested. But I wonder if Devin Singletary is not good enough to earn that rest, so we'd continue playing through the game.
I think Singletary's a really good. I mean, you made the point about the Jets being absolutely atrocious against the run, and they have been all season. And the thing is with Singletary is he's come from nowhere almost, because there was no lead back in Buffalo, but in the last sort of 4 or 5 weeks, it's been all Singletary really out of the backfield, and he's quite efficient. with the work that he's getting as well. And like you've just said, Rich, I don't think he is the kind of player where you'd be like, oh, well, we're absolutely coasting here. Let's rest Devin Singletary. Because I think if anything, no offense to Devin Singletary if you watch the stream, but if anything ever happened to Devin Singletary, I think you could just apply next man up in Buffalo. In all honesty, he's just done well recently because he's had the opportunity, and they've obviously come up against some teams that just aren't very effective against the run.
I think he's had over 5 red zone touches each of the last 3 weeks. Last week he had 9 red zone touches, which
it's amazing, really.
I mean,
he's scored really well in recent weeks.
Yeah, he's done well. I've got this is one of my things I think based on feeling rather than any stats, but I have a feeling that Josh Allen in games like this does tend to play a half, and because he's playing quite relaxed and everything, he does pretty well. And so it could be an interesting contrarian play because people won't play him because they're worried. If he starts, he's going to come off in the first quarter or something like that, or he's just playing for a streak, or to keep his, start streak going or something like that. But yeah, I have a funny feeling that I don't know where it's coming from. No, there's no great analysis there. It's just a thing. The Saints, nobody's particularly. I'm trying to think of any great. Players, anyone you'd be interested in on the Saints?
Deontay Harris is the only guy that I'd consider. His advanced stats are absolutely off the charts in terms of yards per route run and targets per route and things like that. He's just not got on the field much. So I think he's one that feels braced for a big breakout game, but. I don't know much more than that, to be honest.
Yeah, and obviously the Chiefs, we've got lots of options there. If they're motivated to play, then I think there's some great options. Obviously, in the Chiefs again.
They're on Saturday, though, aren't they?
Oh, they are on Saturday, aren't they? So I won't be in these ones all day. So okay, so I won't be playing them. And 49ers we talked about a little bit already. Elijah Mitchell seems like obviously a good play because he's a very good running back. I'm just double checking. He's definitely not on a Saturday, is he? No.
Cam Akers is apparently back this week as well.
He's back
but that is someone I'd avoid this week.
Derrick Henry might be back.
Yeah, apparently so. If anyone is planning on playing Cam Akers, I mean, he could completely prove me wrong here, but I doubt coming off that kind of injury, he comes in with a majority workload. I think they'll just try and ease him in and try and get him up to some kind of game speed for the playoffs. So don't buy into the hype on that he's back this week.
Another reason to play receivers on the Rams. Let everybody else buy the hype.
Absolutely. So, Sony Michel's been really good in recent weeks as well. So there's absolutely no reason to overly risk Cam Akers' health on his first game back from a serious injury.
It's quite a murky backfield then when you've got all 3 of them back.
Yeah, I think Darrell Henderson is. I think he's actually been put on injured reserve, so it's cleared it up a little bit.
Yeah.
But if I was playing anyone, I'd still be playing Sony Michel in that game if I was playing a Rams back.
Cool. So we've gone quite long now. Anything else you want to say about this week, Rich? This week's slate. Anything else? Any areas we've not talked about where you would target?
No, I mean, the only other thing, I guess, is potentially Debo. You talked about the Rams 49ers as being a good game to target. Debo's had an incredible year. I guess he's probably going to be priced high, but it's hard to see him not having another good game.
Yeah, he always seems quite motivated against the Rams as well, Debo, because Aaron Donald once was asked about him in an interview and he said, don't know who he is. And he's been unbelievable against the Rams in every game since, and the same memes and the same clips crop up on social media after it as a reminder. So Debo would be a good smash play, I think, this week. Jalen Ramsey doesn't always follow the number one option on a team.
Oh. Great. Well, I think we will call it a day there then, lads. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Rich.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you also, you covered for Nick as well when he was selfishly having a baby. So
just so single-minded, Nick.
Yeah. I know. I mean, how unthoughtful of me.
I know. And thank you to everybody who's watched and listened and contributed and helped out all our guests and everything this year, all the people who come on the comments and stuff. It's been fantastic. It was a new thing for us doing this year, and I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed it. I can put it into words really. So yeah, final word as ever to you, Nick.
Yeah, so in the off season, one thing I was just going to mention, Mark, is obviously we've done this under the 5-yard banner as part of the 5-yard rush team, but FanTeam do other sports as well. There's a lot of exciting things coming. The Second Chance Premier League is on the verge of launching. The golf is just around the corner. There's a Second Chance NBA game coming. All the tennis, the Indian Premier League. There's the F1 season will start up again. There is contests that are individual contests and season long all throughout the year. So I dare say we'll be back again around August, September time, Mark, to be chatting about NFL all over again. But you will find myself and Mark and Jack will also be covering the golf going forward. And I dare say Mark will also be talking about some other contests as well throughout the off season. So keep an eye out on socials for us. At Nick of Wigan is where you can find me. @_SMRF is where you can find Mark. One last time, I think, for this season, catches for sure, touchdowns for Doe. And Rich, where can the listeners find yourself on socials?
I'm on Twitter at Dynasty Island.
Cheers, Rich. Thank you very much, Mark. And as you said, thanks for all the guests we've had on. Thanks for all the listeners. Happy New Year, of course, as well. And best of luck in this weekend's games. We will see you next season.